Let's talk right now about what is going on, not just in Israel, in Gaza, but also in the mind of our Prime Minister and indeed the mind of the French President Emmanuel Macron and indeed the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney in basically saying to Hamas, oh, well done for October the 7th. Let us reward you now by saying we will recognise a Palestinian state. Our own Prime Minister last week not even placing a single condition, 4 conditions on the Israeli government about whether or not they would recognise a Palestinian state. Not one on Hamas. And what a surprise then that we did see that a senior Hamas leader interviewed on television over the weekend. This is Ghazi Hamad, a senior member, said that the recognition of a Palestinian state by these major G7 nations was one of the fruits of October the 7th. Let's talk to Eylon Levy about this. He's a former Israeli government spokesman. He's also a host of the Israel State of a Nation podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, Eylon.
Hello, Julia.
Thank you. Just first of all, just talk about, we talked about a lot on the show last week, the madness, the insanity, the immorality of what Keir Starmer and Mark Carney and Emmanuel Macron did, but particularly, I think, Keir Starmer in saying he would recognise the state of Palestine by September, by the UN General Assembly, with not a single condition on Hamas. Were you remotely surprised that Hamas leaders have welcomed that?
I have to hand it to Sir Keir Starmer. It really takes skill to cock up so badly that a proscribed terrorist group is congratulating your foreign policy and welcoming it as a historic achievement. Hamas sees recognition of Palestinian statehood as a victory. It's calling it the fruits of October 7th. And if they think they're reaping the fruits of October 7th, then they'll sow another harvest. And that means that Starmer, Macron, Carney are encouraging Hamas to commit more barbaric atrocities against Israelis, to kill more babies, to kill more families, to rape more women, to take more hostages. They're telling them terrorism works. And I'm imploring them, before it's too late, understand the damage that you are doing and how you are emboldening Hamas to continue its terrorism instead of doing what it should be doing, which is laying down its arms, releasing the hostages and letting this horrible war end.
Indeed. And Keir Starmer and many of his ministers, and we've seen the other world leaders say, well, obviously that too, but not a condition. And given also that perverse incentive that actually if there isn't a ceasefire, i.e. the hostages are not given back, then a Palestinian state will get recognised. I mean, it is quite insane, quite apart from the madness of the fact that, you can't recognise a state that who would rule it, who's in charge of it. It's not a democracy. We've got 2 different leaderships, 2 different organisations, neither of which held an election in the last 20 years. We've got, no precise borders. They're not even conjoined. There are so many arguments why this is not a thing right now. But it's very noticeable, not just our governments, but also our media, in particular the BBC, who's I've just given up all hope of the BBC now, that they seem to provide more. Well, they treat the 2 combatants as if they are equally morally equivalent. The Israeli government, the elected government of a democratic nation state, one of our allies, and a proscribed terrorist group in Hamas. They seem to treat them equally. When they talk about walking away from ceasefire talks, they seem to think that both sides are equally moral. It is quite obscene, isn't it?
I mean, remember the fundamental difference here. On one side, you have a democratic nation state, and on the other hand, you have a terrorist organization that launched an illegal war of aggression, took hostages, fought that war from a network of military tunnels underneath people's feet, refuses to hand back the hostages, hijacks aid, and refuses to surrender. This is a war that needs to end, but it's a war that has to end with Hamas accepting the inevitable. It needs to leave power in Gaza, and it needs to free the hostages. And another note about the British media, I've been shocked by how the British media has completely ignored the 2 horrific videos of hostages that Hamas and Islamic Jihad released this weekend. I thought I'd seen the worst of Hamas's psychological terrorism when they paraded dead baby coffins. I thought I'd seen the worst when they released a video of a dead hostage just days after his funeral. And I thought I saw the worst when they took a hostage and filmed him begging for his life at a ceremony releasing his friends. But now they took poor Eviatar David, who looks like a skeleton. He looks like an Auschwitz inmate. And they made him dig his own grave for the cameras. Islamic Jihad released a video of Paul Rombraslavsky. He's a hero. He stayed behind at the Nova Festival to try to rescue Israelis during the Hamas massacre, and they reduced him to a simpering rat of a human being who can't stop sobbing, can barely stand, says he can't breathe, can barely get up to go to the toilet, and is begging for his survival. Hamas and Islamic Jihad are systematically starving the hostages, and they need urgent medical attention, and they need to get out immediately. And I think it's a damn shame that so many in the media are choosing to downplay the plight of those hostages who are being held with absolutely no justification. They can continue some narrative that this is all somehow Israel's fault, when I've been going blue in the face for 2 years saying this is not a war that Israel wanted or started.
Indeed. And again, those images, and we've been showing those images on screen, we had to put a warning up for those who are watching them on our YouTube page. They are absolutely horrific. I mean, again, as you say, you know, one of those men, Rom, he's too weak to even move from his bed. I mean, and you need to see the pictures of these vibrant, beautiful, young, fit men before they were taken. It is extraordinary. And so... just so little attention to this. Now, in the last few weeks, we've had a lot of attention in this media, in British media and around the world.
Julia, Hamas is doing this because it knows it can get away with it.
Exactly.
Hamas is doing this because it knows it can get away with it.
Well, exactly. We've had a lot of attention on children who are hungry, starving, skeletal pictures of children. Now, I know I've been following you on social media. Some of these have been completely exposed. I mean, one of the children who was on the front page of the Express, was a child who was actually in Italy, been in Italy for the last few months, because sadly has a congenital problem. There has been an issue in terms of a lack of aid getting in to Gaza. Lots of criticism, Benjamin Netanyahu, but so much the criticism from the West is based on but you need to give Hamas what they want. You need to get those hostages released, and then you need to get out and end the war in Gaza. Would you support that?
This is not a time to throw Hamas a lifeline. Israelis are debating the impossible dilemma. On the one hand, we have to get the hostages back. On the other hand, we have to stop Hamas taking hostages ever again. Because if the war ends with Hamas still in power, it's only a matter of time until they can run across the border again, break into people's bedrooms, take children, and snatch them back into Gaza.
And they've said they will do that. They have said they would do that every single day.
And they've said they will do it again and again. Exactly. And that's why even Israelis who say, look, give Hamas whatever they want, pay the ransom, say, and then we have to go back to fighting Hamas afterwards because there's no way that we can live next to this terrorist regime. So Israelis are facing this very difficult question of what price, what ransom we can pay for the hostages
now that's
release.
The thing.
And the tragedy is now Hamas doesn't want to deal at all.
No.
Because it's using the hostages not only as bargaining chips to survive this war, but as pawns to psychologically terrorize Israeli society.
And they'll get a Palestinian state, they believe. I don't think it'll actually happen even in my lifetime, frankly, at this point. But they think they're on the way to get it without doing that.
Starmer is telling them to keep going.
But this is the interesting thing. Okay, so Britain and America and others have a very, very clear policy. We do not negotiate with terrorists. We do not pay ransoms for hostages. And yet they are demanding that Netanyahu and the Israelis pay a ransom for hostages and that they do negotiate with terrorists. Now, what you can understand, that even Qatar walked away, and they're funding Hamas, for goodness sake. Even Qatar walked away from the negotiating table as one of the parties in the recent weeks because Hamas demands were so unreasonable. Israel is sending hundreds and hundreds of convicted prisoners and terrorists back to Gaza in return for each one of their hostages they are getting back, even for dead bodies, extraordinarily. And yet we're told that Hamas are basically saying, unless Israel agree, major releases and every single IDF soldier out of Gaza, full stop, and never coming back, they will not release those hostages. Is that anything that forget Netanyahu, whether people like him or not, corruption charges, whatever, is that I think that any reasonable person could ever agree to?
Yeah, that's a great point. I heard an interview, I think it was the British business secretary speaking on the BBC.
I'm sorry you had to hear that.
Whether there would be any conditions. And he said Hamas is a terrorist group and we don't negotiate with terrorists. And this is just a classic case of do as I say, not as I do. Yeah. When in the next sentence he can call for Israel to negotiate a ceasefire with the terrorists.
Yeah.
The fact is, whoever is in power in Israel is going to have to deal with the threat of Hamas, whose goal is the destruction of the state of Israel. October 7th was not just a terror attack. It was the opening shot of a regional war against Israel. What Hamas was expecting on October 7th was to pull Hezbollah, the Houthis, Iran, all the other proxies in the region.
Well, they did
into
try.
An all-out attack on every front. They tried, and they spectacularly screwed up the timing. But that was the Iranian regime's plan, to use Hamas to launch an all-out regional war that would lead to the collapse of the state of Israel. And whoever is in power in Israel is going to have to deal with the fact that there is a jihadi terrorist group in Hamas, in Gaza, that is sworn to Israel's destruction. And so even those who are saying, get the hostages out now, end the war, pay the ransom, give Hamas what it wants, are also saying, and then eventually we'll have to go back and fight Hamas at a later date. No one in Israel thinks we can get a ceasefire with Hamas staying there. And this is really important, because when world leaders are saying Hamas can have no role in the future of Gaza, and also there must be an immediate ceasefire. Well, an immediate ceasefire means leaving Hamas in power. So how about, instead of paying lip service, you help us and give us some creative ideas on how we can remove Hamas from power? Because, you know, world leaders, British leaders can't say Hamas must lay down its arms, it must relinquish power. And what's the or else?
And every single world leader, including Keir Starmer and Donald Trump or Joe Biden before him, or everyone else, Emmanuel Macron, they need to ask themselves, if the same had happened to us on the same scale as happened to Israel on October the 7th, 2023, what would we be doing now? And I tell you what, we wouldn't be negotiating with the people who did it. Eylon Levy, thank you so much. He's the host of the Israel State of a Nation podcast. Thank you so much. Sam Armstrong, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, why is it that we expect Israel, and only Israel, Israel, to accept things that no other nation in the history of humanity has ever been asked to accept? And those scenes, they were redolent of the Holocaust. I fully believe,
deliberately so.
I fully believe that that was the intention. That was the display. And Hamas was taunting them. And why shouldn't it taunt them, Julia? Because they conducted a literal pogrom on the people of Israel just over a year ago. And what have they got in return? What have they got in return for it? Everything they ever asked for and more. We are fools. We are fools, and we have played. I don't think
it's foolish. I think it's immoral. I no longer think it's just naivety on the part of our government and many of world leaders. I think it's much more sinister than that.
Well, it's all right, because we're bringing 300 of them plus their families.
Can we talk? Can we talk about that? Actually, just very briefly. Yeah, I mean, actually, we'll talk about it more after 12 as well. But yeah, bringing 300,000 people. 300. What was I saying? 300.
What?
We've already had a few dozen come over for private health treatment, again, negotiated visas, but we're talking about 300 children with their parents
and
siblings, and then of course they'll be bringing second cousins. They're going to come here. The odds of any of those children and families leaving this country after treatment, zero.
None of them will ever go back.
And they will be bringing their entire families with them. What's wrong with treating these kids in Qatar? We can pay for it.
And if you are sat at the moment and you're waiting for a knee op or a hip op or any surgery, any treatment on the NHS of any variety, you are going to go back to the back of the queue to wait for these people. These are people to whom we owe nothing. It's got nothing to do with us whatsoever. This is yet another bung from Keir, it's another bung from Keir Starmer to his constituents in Muslim parts of the country.
Absolutely.